Well, thank you very much, Susan. I want to welcome everyone to our second open house for the City Plan 2041 official plan update. We're so happy to see so many of you here to join us this evening. Updating the city's official plan is a major priority for this council, as it is a key guiding document for both the public and private development in our city. Our city vision is to create complete communities that make Richmond Hill one of the most attractive places to live, work, and play in York Region, and the GTA for that matter. We are planning for the next 20 years in Richmond Hill, and we want to make sure that this update is focused on being future ready. To that end, we have brought in a visionary planner, David Dixon, to assist us with this work, and from whom you will be hearing tonight. And we are undertaking extensive public and stakeholder consultation. It's important to this council that we hear from a wide range of perspectives to ensure that we understand how best to capture the opportunities that are and will be available to us in the future. Your involvement today and in future engagement activities is critical to the success of this official plan, and we appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to participate in this process. Tonight's meeting is about emerging key directions for the official plan update. I want to take this opportunity to thank staff for organizing this event and for listening to the feedback we have received to date, undertaking research and drafting these key directions. During and following the event, I hope that participants of this meeting will continue to provide feedback so that we can make sure that we are getting things right when it comes to planning our city for the future. We look forward to seeing you all and hearing from you. Your input is so valuable. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and please don't be shy about being forthcoming with your comments so that we can, as a community, develop this plan in the best way possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the words of welcome. If we can move to the next slide, that would be great. So I do want to echo the welcome this evening. I also want to thank members of council who are joining us this evening. I know you all have busy schedules, so I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and hear what community members have to say. I can see Councillor Munch, Councillor West, and Councillor Chan on the screen. I know others were intending to join us as well. From the city staff side, this is an important initiative, and we have representation from Patrick Lee, who's the Director of Planning Policy with us. Marianne Dempster, who's the City Manager, may be joining us this evening, as well as a number of other city staff who are here to listen and hear your thoughts as these emerging key directions evolve. So our agenda for this evening, we have sort of three key points. We're going to have a presentation by Sibel Van Kersel, who's the Manager of Planning Policy, on the context of the emerging key directions, followed by David Dixon, who's our keynote speaker. We'll be discussing planning for change, and his presentation will be in collaboration with Sibel, who will be presenting the key directions in Richmond Hill. We've divided the information kind of into three main areas. So we're going to be hearing about urban structure and built form, intensification, climate change implementation, and technical updates for the official plan. For each of these, we're going to do a bit of a mix of presentation, a quick poll to see if it's heading in the right direction, and then we'll have opportunities for some questions of clarification for you. So again, we're encouraging folks to use the chat. You can provide comments as we go through or questions. James and Lauren are going to be working with me to be able to bring those forward when we get to those question times. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can during those question periods, but we do have a lot of ground to cover this evening. I will ask that the comments are respectful and the questions are respectful, and I'll ask that the questions, if possible, are kept as brief, just so we can hear from as many people as possible. And I'll encourage the staff and our speakers to also be brief in their responses so we can hear from folks. If there are things you don't get to share tonight, don't worry. There are other ways that you can provide your input. We'll be talking about those at the end of the evening, but there is a survey and a contact where you can ask further questions or provide your feedback. If we can go to the next one, that would be great. So the objectives for this evening are really three things. So one, it's an information exchange between you and city staff. Two, it's to inform you about and gauge your support for these emerging key directions. And three, it's to provide a baseline of information for ongoing engagement with you. We can go to the next one. That would be great. Thanks. So in terms of public engagement so far, we launched this process in February 2021 with an open house that was very well attended. We had David Dixon speak at that event as well and had a survey available, as well as the My Favorite Places app on the city's website. We had workshops and surveys in the spring, both with businesses and through neighborhood areas, and had a lot of feedback through those. For each of those events, the LURA team put together a What We Heard report that is available on the website. We have the Planning for Change playbook available on the website, and that brings us to our open house number 2 and survey that's available now. The official plan update emerging key directions is also available on the site, and it was shared with the official plan update committee on September 21st. So that is available. So while, before we kind of jump in further, I'd like to do a quick poll. This is maybe a bit of our warm-up poll. When we had that session in February, we asked participants what brought them here today. There are a number of options that should have popped up on the screen. You can select as many as you like, but this gives us a sense about what's important to you. While that's going in, I see there was a question in the chat about if the presentation will be available on the city's website, and it will be available. James has kindly put the link to that website in the chat. Okay, we'll just give it a couple more seconds. Okay. All right, so hopefully people can see on the screen the results of our first poll. So it looks like a pretty even distribution between the various elements that we asked, which is very similar to February. So in February, there was interest in all 5. So again, tonight, there's interest in all 5 areas. In February, the environment, economic, and social sustainability were the highest, followed closely by neighborhoods, nature and cultural heritage, and then the last 2 were develop and the streets, trails, and parks. So a little bit of a different distribution, but very similar where there's interest across them all. So that's great. That's great to see. And I hope the presentations will help you understand these emerging key directions under each of these areas. So if we can just close the poll, that would be great. And if we can move to the next one. Perfect. So at this time, I'm going to invite Sibel then Kurcell, who's the manager of planning policy, to provide some context for the emerging key directions. Isabel.
Thanks, Susan. Sorry, for a second there, I lost my unmute button. So thanks, everyone. And I'm really happy to be here again to speak to you about this phase of our official plan update process. Through our engagement in the spring, we heard that the majority of participants in this process support this 2041 city planning vision, which is derived from Council's strategic priorities noted on the left-hand side of the slide. It is with this vision in mind that we will speak about future readiness and proposed emerging key directions. During our public workshops, this vision was explained by stating it is a recognition of the city's enviable location in the heart of York Region and the GTA in general. This vision statement recognizes our central location within the region's urban communities, that it hosts 2 BRT lines, GO stations, a future subway system, and a 407 transitway. This vision leads us to establish an urban structure that supports transit-oriented, vibrant community development, starting with Richmond Hill Center. This vision provides official plan direction that supports Richmond Hill as a robust region-serving mixed-use community. This vision directs us to invest in public infrastructure that not only supports residents and businesses of Richmond Hill, but also those of York Region. And finally, this vision brings about a call to action to partner with York Region and other levels of government, agencies, stakeholders, developers, and the public to achieve common city building goals. Next slide, please. During the open house in February, we also explained that when we update the official plan, we will evaluate policy and mapping changes based on how well the proposed changes respond to the 4 pillars noted on this slide. Grow our economy, design for excellence, be green and sustainable, and protect and enhance what we cherish. We restated these pillars during our May workshops as well. The Emerging Key Directions document on our website provides a description of each of the pillars. As we move forward today towards updating the city's official plan, it is important that we establish a framework that outlines the scope of the update to ensure that the proposed vision and urban structure for City Plan 2041 can be achieved. And this framework needs to apply the 4 pillars of the official plan update for evaluating policy and or mapping changes. For this reason, the report will essentially clarify our scope of work for the official plan update. Next slide, please. The key directions that we'll be speaking about respond to questions posed in the official plan update initiation report that we shared with Council and the public in 2019. These questions were posed in the 8 categories noted on the slide. Tonight's presentation would touch on all of these categories. Next slide, please. The engagement to date and the research undertaken by staff for this official plan update and related initiatives together inform the key directions. At a very high level, the essence of these key directions are threefold. We need to update our official plan to articulate a 2041 vision for city planning, to establish an urban structure that directs growth to centers and corridors, supports economic development by enabling more jobs within the city, and ensures development is environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable. And thirdly, to address key issues such as housing affordability, out-migration of residents for jobs, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and a combination of diverse lifestyles among city residents and workers. Next slide, please. When updating the city's official plan, we all need to take into consideration today's planning context, which is much different from the context we were working with back in 2010, when Council adopted the Building a New Kind of Urban Official Plan. At the provincial, regional, and local level, the context has changed in so many ways. We have new and updated provincial plans, which we have noted in our staff reports and previous presentations. These plans have become more directive and in some ways more protective of the environment, natural and rural areas. The Planning Act has changed to give municipal councils more decision-making authority and also to reduce red tape and expedite planning approvals. At the regional level, we know the region is updating its official plan and will be taking on a more active role when it comes to matters such as employment area protection and settlement area expansions. At the local level, in 2019, we officially became a city, and that in of itself has its connotations and raises expectations in terms of how the city functions and competes within the broader regional context and even at the GTA scale. And as you'll hear from David Dixon, there are powerful trends that pose new opportunities and challenges that can shape how we update our official plan. These include rapid knowledge industry growth and the rise of new work models, dramatic demographic changes in terms of an aging population and an increase in the number of smaller households, enhanced transit, including the provision of a subway, and rapidly evolving mobility technologies, growing housing affordability challenges, and growing awareness of and responsibility for addressing climate change. So that, in a nutshell, is the context we are working with for today's open house. Thanks, Susan.
Great, Sibel, thank you so much. I'd like to introduce David Dixon. So David Dixon is Stantec's Urban Places Fellow. You may remember David from our launch open house in February, and he has presented a couple of times to the Official Plan Update Committee. He has significant achievements in creating livable neighborhoods, vibrant city spaces, and vital downtowns. And as you can see here, led planning and urban design projects in a number of places in Canada and in the US. So with that, I welcome David, who will be co-presenting with Sibel. David.
Okay, once again, thank you very much, Susan and Sibel. And why don't we jump to enough about me? Let's go to the next slide. Talk about you. Okay, so I was, as Sibel mentioned, asked to put together that's a playbook. Now, I didn't do it by myself. I did it in part by listening to what a great many of you said mattered to you and to the kinds of questions you had about not so much the future, but how to build a more complete Richmond Hill. And what were the tools and changes that Richmond Hill could leverage to enhance quality of life and things you cared about. The playbook is intended it's a resource for the official plan. It is to provide guidance to council and planning staff. I think I'm not sure if guidance is the right word, but it's really data and information. And I would emphasize not just to council and planning staff, but to everybody on this call. Maybe the most important role of the playbook is to help this process be even more transparent by making all the information, all the data, all the perspective that's available to planning staff, to council, available to all of you. I should also say that because I'm very old and have had the privilege of working in lots of places, the playbook benefits, I hope, in ways are useful to all of you from lessons learned from other communities with similar aspirations. Next, please. So what are the key messages? Richmond Hill, in the midst of rapid change, is committed to future-proofing. That's a term I'm still getting used to, but think of it as to managing change for community benefit. And one of the things that Sibel has mentioned, and you'll hear a lot, is that managing change is as much about what you preserve and don't change as what you do change, because it's frankly not good enough. It's not contributing to a complete community. It's about working with the council's, I think, terrific priorities, which offer, I think, a very strong foundation for managing change and helping to translate those in ways that really leverage the trends that are reshaping our communities and putting them to work to create the kind of community you want. It's about a strategy that starts with a strong focus towards centers and corridors. And I will talk more about this. Sibel will certainly talk more about it, but how should I say it? So for many decades, folks maybe moved out of where they had been living to live in Richmond Hill. Now the time is to invite them to move in to Richmond Hill. And because we are an era in which people are not so much leaving where they don't want to live, but going to where they really do want to live, places that are walkable, have really lively public realms, parks, great main streets that are affordable, that are connected to jobs, to culture, to what all the great things the GTA has to offer, and that are authentic and have their own living cultures. And that's certainly true of Richmond Hill. The advantages of focusing growth towards these centers and corridors is that it's a way in as we move forward to, in some ways, realize all the best of Richmond Hill, to really tap its full potential and bring it to life in these places where you have the density and level of new investment that can really unlock these qualities. And it's important to remember that, this will surprise no one on this call, change never stops. So part of the purpose of the playbook is to help the city sort of frame the goals that may be and probably will be more enduring than the circumstances around those goals. Meaning, as circumstances change, how do we keep implementing, working toward the goals that are really about enhancing quality of life and opportunity for Richmond Hill? Next, please. So, Sibel mentioned some fundamental changes, and probably the best place to start here, I hope it's the best because that's where we are starting, is fundamental changes in our economy. So going forward for the next, and I'm going to sort of summarize these slides with that rather than read them directly. Going forward over the next 2 decades at least, North America, most of the world, are going to have a real labor shortage because frankly, we're not having as many kids. Our workforce is growing more slowly. At the same time, an increasingly growing share of net new, not total jobs, but net, well, the increase in jobs, the net increase in jobs are going to require higher education. And we are really beginning to experience across the developed world a dramatic shortage of this talent, folks with some higher education. Jobs and investment follow these folks. It is our knowledge economy that supports expanded opportunity, economic growth, and it is following these folks to where they want to live and work, which is in what I'll call live, work, play, innovate communities. Think of what you can create as you build a new generation of centers and corridors. It's also important to recognize that knowledge, because our knowledge economy, our innovation economy are where growth is occurring. This is the economy. The workers who attract these jobs and investment are the folks who, along with this economy, who create jobs for everyone. So we're working, for example, in the city of Buffalo, not that far from you, which estimates that each new knowledge industry job creates 3 to 5 other jobs. It actually really supports starting small businesses. Many of the jobs that it helps create are jobs being lost by folks who need those jobs. Next, please. I love this cartoon from the Wall Street Journal. Goodbye office parks, drawn by amenities and talent. Tech firms are opting for cities, the joys of urban tech. Think maybe not so much cities, but walkable, mixed use, lively, community rich places. This is the larger sort of illustrative sketch you see there. That place doesn't exist yet. Is Kendall Square in Cambridge, which is probably one of the strongest innovation districts in actually North America. And I was involved in planning for its next generation. And frankly, in order to attract the talent, the jobs and investment that would allow Kendall Square to flourish, it was all about creating a better place for people, including the neighbors who walked from their single family neighborhoods into Kendall Square to enjoy coffee, beer, and ice cream. Lots of beer. Next, please. So fortuitously, at the same time that our economy really needs to create, we need to create these live, work, play, highly amenitized, walkable districts. Our changing demographics are providing the market engine that is enabling us to do this. So for the next 2 decades, the very large majority, a lot of estimates say more than 80% of all net new households or increase in households will be singles and couples without kids. The demand, the net new growth in households is the same as the housing market. That means we will have the strongest housing market for these walkable, mixed use, lively, culturally rich, live, work, play centers and corridors that CBEL has and will talk more about. If you look just at Richmond Hill, in fact, the large majority of demand for housing, certainly more than half, probably 2/3, is likely to be for lofts, apartments, condominiums, townhouses, and keep thinking walkable, mixed use, lively, community rich. This is where, and since housing is 2/3 of the region's real estate economy, where housing goes is where development and community building goes. So managing this for community benefit is a terrific opportunity going forward, and this is the time to plan for it. Next, please. It's also important to note, CBEL has mentioned affordability, that for lots of reasons that if you people have questions, we can talk about it. But I think that we're all experiencing housing prices, including and especially in Richmond Hill, have been rising a lot faster than incomes since at least 2000. Affordability is an increasing crisis. And remember, you don't build a future out of the people who can afford to live in Richmond Hill today necessarily. You build the future out of the folks that you want to bring to Richmond Hill, many of whom will need affordable housing in order to be the future leaders of Richmond Hill's economy and community. We are a rapidly aging society. The lack of affordability is one thing that frankly keeps communities from bringing in the next generation and sort of hastens an aging process that can bring problems later on. Probably if you look at what folks want most when you ask them in focus groups, and I mean folks of all ages, not just those of you lucky enough to be young, what matters most when they choose where they want to live, it's the ability, it says here proximity, think of live no more than a 5-minute, 400-meter walk from a lively main street, a place where you can hang out with friends and get more of that coffee and beer that I was talking about, and maybe ice cream. And convenient access to transit matters more and more. One very interesting correlation to keep in mind is the very same folks that you want to attract to build your economy, to attract jobs and investment, are the same folks who would love if they not to have to own a car if possible, and certainly don't want to have to depend on one. Think of the advantages of transit that is coming to Richmond Hill and to these centers and corridors. Next, please. All of this is reinforced by the mobility innovations you've heard so much about. The North American automobile fleet turns over every 15 years. 15 years from now, we'll all be driving vehicles, if we're driving, that are they're connected. They talk to each other. They can drive in I'm going to use feet now. No, okay. Lanes a little over 2 meters wide rather than the 3 or more meters that are required today. They will self-park. This is before we get to autonomous mobility. So all the parking structures, all the parking facilities that we've built will be able to start accommodating more and more cars, because self-parking cars park a lot more efficiently than we do. This is not the era to be planning new roadway lanes. We're going to need fewer of them, and those we have will be able to carry more traffic going forward. And then we will move into the era by the probably mid-2040s of autonomous mobility, particularly shared autonomous mobility. We can talk more about this, but it's much more likely that that will be the really preferred form of mobility, and these won't park. So we will be able to densify these corridors and centers in ways without having to pay the very expensive cost to provide structured parking, which will make them still more competitive. Next, please. I think, CBEL, it's back to you.
Great, thanks, David. Your comments and insights are a great segue for me to introduce emerging key directions related to urban structure and built form categories. Next slide, please. The urban structure identified in the official plan is a foundational piece for land use planning in the city. We are proposing to maintain the principal layers of the urban structure as noted in this diagram. Some of you may recall that we discussed urban structure with the official plan update committee and the public at the beginning of this year. And based on that consultation, we are proposing some strategic changes to the city structure based on big moves we have presented in February. We are proposing to follow 3 of the 4 big moves that were proposed. Big move 1 recommended aligning our urban structure with the regional direction by recognizing major transit station areas and regional corridors within our intensification hierarchy. To that end, we will direct growth to the Yonge Street corridor from Highway 7 through to Bloomington Road, along Highway 7 corridor at Bathurst and from Yonge Street to Highway 404, and at the Richmond Hill and Gormley GO stations. Big move 2 recommended aligning our urban structure with regional employment areas and broad and select employment areas to support a greater mix of land use and economic opportunities. To that end, we will continue to protect our employment areas while supporting modest conversion of employment lands located at Yonge and Edford Road, Newkirk and Major Mackenzie, and at Highway 7 in East Beaver Creek. Big move 3 recommended designating 3 new mixed-use growth areas within the intensification hierarchy to implement regional major transit station area transit supportive development direction. To that end, we propose promoting Bathurst and Highway 7 area from Parkway Belt West Plan designation to permit mixed-use development, promoting Bayview and Highway 7 area from the neighborhood designation to permit mixed-use development, and promoting East Beaver Creek and Highway 7 area from employment to also permit a mix of land uses that better support the use of rapid transit. Next slide, please. These big move changes are responsive to anticipated growth within the city. It is important to note that the region is proposing to assign a forecast of up to 317,000 residents and 122,600 jobs by 2051 or thereabouts. These numbers are not yet final, so that's the approximate number for now. This forecast is based upon projections for the region that were done by the province per the growth plan. And that forecast is then allocated by the region to local municipalities. Over the next 20 to 30 years, we may grow more or less in line with this forecast, but it will largely depend upon numerous factors, most important of which is the desirability of Richmond Hill as a place to live and work. Desirability can be influenced by the quality of infrastructure that is provided to support growth. This infrastructure largely relies on public investment in things like streets, parks, emergency services, schools, and utilities. For that reason, before we entrench anything in the official plan, we want to work with providers of this infrastructure to ensure that planning for long-term growth in the city can be supported through existing and planned infrastructure. To that end, we've shared a draft forecast with our transportation, water and wastewater, parks and recreation consultants, as well as school boards, to understand how and confirm that the proposed growth can be accommodated over the long term. Because having high quality services that the city and these agencies provide is essential for attracting and retaining growth in our communities, it goes without saying that we need to ensure that the public realm is built up and maintained in lockstep with new growth and development. Next slide, please. Built form is about the interface between public and private realm. As land becomes more scarce and place becomes more desirable, there will be competing interests, and the solution to that will be to alter built form standards from the current norms, and in some cases allow for a blurring of ownership where public and private public realm matters are commingled. Built form varies and will vary across the city as it will need to be planned considering the local context in terms of physical form and land use, as well as the environmental, social, and economic context. To manage interests and respond to context, we need innovative solutions and policies. In the next few slides, I will elaborate on some key directions in relation to built form. Next slide. A key direction is to ensure that the official plan continues to advocate for and guide placemaking for both public and private realm investment and change. From a placemaking perspective, it is important that we continue to direct the majority of growth to our centers and corridors, as David has already noted in his presentation. I will speak about centers and corridors in greater detail when I elaborate on intensification related key directions later in this presentation. Next slide, please. In terms of neighborhoods, it is really important that we recognize that there's a diversity of neighborhoods across the city, and that as we continue to plan for these areas, we should not lose sight of those distinguishing features. At the same time, we also want to look at opportunities to improve our neighborhoods, make them more complete and age-friendly. And that does mean we need to allow for some change within them to adapt to the changing needs and lifestyles of Richmond Hill residents. The image on the right-hand side of the slide identifies housing forms that are coined as the missing middle. These are house forms that we see in older parts of our city and other places across the GTA that are in some cases being demolished and are not being reintroduced to our communities. These house forms, however, often provide or have the potential to provide ground-oriented housing that is affordable to households that are not able to afford single or semi-detached housing in Richmond Hill. These households are made up of Richmond Hill residents who are possibly 1 or 2 income households led by middle managers, teachers, firefighters, single parents, newly graduated university students, persons on fixed pensions, and so much more. Next slide, please. In terms of our employment areas, we want to continue to preserve the majority of these areas for long-term employment uses, especially those that cannot be accommodated in mixed-use neighborhood environment. We see these areas as vital for our ongoing economic competitiveness. We also understand the marketplace is changing with more automation, greater emphasis on the knowledge and renewable energy economy, and so much more. And in that regard, we want to work with the business community to ensure our policies provide sufficient flexibility to ensure that they can set up and or expand expeditiously. Next slide, please. In terms of our Greenway system, this is an important component of our urban structure. The Greenway includes natural areas, major open space, rural areas, and agricultural areas. The Greenway provides opportunities for expanding our economy, fostering tourism, contributing to our food system, and supporting green energy. As a key direction, we want to ensure that the official plan highlights what this system has to offer to our communities and future land users within these areas. Next slide, please. Another key direction is to more overtly introduce the concept of mobility hierarchy within our official plan. On that basis, we want to evaluate our policies to ensure that they truly recognize and facilitate this hierarchy. You'll recall David spoke about autonomous vehicles and micromobility. We want to make sure our plan accounts for these innovations through this hierarchy. Walking is at the top of the hierarchy because, as David noted in his presentation, walkability is a key ingredient to complete communities. What is new to this hierarchy is micromobility and shared vehicles. In this context, micromobility speaks to emerging trends related to electrified bikes and scooters and other such devices that make traveling much easier than it is in the non-electrified versions. With the use of these modes of travel, people may be more willing and able to travel over longer distances at faster speeds than they are using the non-electrified versions, and as such may prefer them over using their private automobile. Shared vehicles go beyond traditional carpooling, and many of you have likely used services such as Uber and Lyft. This category goes even beyond those options and brings into the discussion autonomous vehicles run through public fleets, like David had mentioned. This hierarchy considers a number of factors, including traffic safety, traffic congestion, sustainability, equity, health, and trip value. Implementing this hierarchy in our plan and decision-making reinforces the direction to accommodate and direct the majority of growth to our centers and corridors, and make capital and public realm investments accordingly. The point is that we need to make room for all of these modes of travel and think of ways to accommodate them. This will be addressed in the city's transportation master plan, but it is also needs to be addressed in our official plan in order for it to work. Next slide, please. So finally, before I speak to the last built form key direction, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that as we direct growth to our centers and corridors, we will be experiencing more dense and taller buildings in the city. It is important to understand that this type of compact built form has many social, economic, and environmental benefits. This built form creates mixed use environments which make new businesses more economically viable when customers or clients are in close proximity. This built form also is intrinsically more affordable than our traditional sprawling suburban development, as we've learned through the preparation of an affordable housing strategy. In that same regard, as we learned through our community energy and emissions plan, results in lower greenhouse gas emissions as well. Next slide, please. But density of development alone does not create desirable communities for people to live and work in, as David so eloquently indicated to us. We need to have commensurate public realm, and we need to ensure that new development engages and contributes well to that public realm. In that regard, this key direction suggests that we have policies that support urban design principles that David has shared with us in previous presentations and in his Planning for Change document. And these include elements like walkability, connectivity, diverse and lively public realm, choice of places to live, work, play, innovate, and authenticity. And while it is not shown on the slide, this key direction also indicates that our official plan should provide sufficient criteria to guide the development of private proposals and their evaluation to ensure that new development does indeed result in a net public benefit, not only to the occupants of a new building, but also to those people and workers that surround it. To that end, we want to ensure that design excellence factors in 15-minute community expectations that we had discussed with the public during our May workshops. And that brings me to the end of this first section of our presentation. Thanks. Back to you, Susan.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Lots of good information shared on built form, which is great. And I see a few things have been coming in through the chat. What we wanted to do is do a quick poll to start, and then we'll have some opportunity to gather more thoughts in the chat and answer some questions. So the poll asks just if you agree or strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree, or if you're unsure with the statement of the emerging key directions for urban structure and built form. Do they help achieve the vision and support 4 pillars of the OP? And the vision in those 4 pillars are on the slide. And again, you're welcome to add further thoughts in the chat as well. See a few more coming in, so we'll just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, great. Hopefully everybody can see that on their screen, so you can see the distribution. We had about 16% on strongly agree, 43 on agree, 16 on disagree, 2 on strongly disagree, and 24 on unsure. Okay. So it sounds like for a number of you, this is headed in the right direction, but a few folks are feeling like it's not the right fit, or some may be unsure. If there's questions that you need clarified to be able to sort of have a a more concrete answer on that, we're happy to answer those. These kinds of questions are in that survey as well. So you're welcome to, think about it if you're unsure, and go and hopefully get some of these questions answered that may help you, and then fill it out in the survey. So I'm going to, if we can switch it now just to the next slide. So we're going to open it up for kind of questions of clarifications. We want to stay on that built form urban structure theme, if you will, because we've got a couple of other areas to cover off after we have some questions and responses from the team. Again, just asking if you can keep your question brief and the answers brief, that would be great, so we can get to as many people as possible. I'm going to start with one person who had their hand up. So you're welcome to put your hand up if you'd like to be unmuted and ask your question, or I see other folks have got some stuff going in the chat. So either is completely fine. And I'm going to ask if we could unmute Giuseppe. And if you'd like to ask your question, that would be great. So Giuseppe, it looks like you're able to unmute. Did you want to ask a question? Okay, we're not hearing you come through. So maybe what we'll do, James, is we'll switch to somebody in the chat, and then hopefully we can come back to Giuseppe's question. And Giuseppe, if your sound's not working and you can put something in the chat, that would be great as well. James?
Great, thanks, Susan. So someone was wondering if the team could note some of the key differences or changes from the 2010 urban structure to what's being presented this evening.
Sure, I'll answer that question, James. As I noted in my presentation, the urban structure is not significantly changing, but as I mentioned, we are moving with those three big moves, which included extending the intensification corridor up Yonge Street all the way to Bloomington Road as a regional mixed-use corridor. We are proposing some employment area conversions to allow for more mixed-use development to happen in certain areas along Yonge Street and Highway 7. And the other big move was some of the promoting of some areas from Parkway Belt to a mixed-use designation, as well as the area at Bayview and Highway 7 from neighborhood to a mixed-use designation, and finally converting the employment area at Beaver Creek and Highway 7 also to a mixed-use area. So those are some of the big moves and big changes in the overall urban structure for the city at this point.
Okay, great. Thanks, Abel. James, do another one in the chat, and then we'll go to the hands up.
Yep. The next question is specifically for David. So where have the projected changes in travel behavior assumed in your presentation been achieved outside of inner city areas?
Okay, I think that's a great question. I saw it when it came up, and I'm going to quickly say lots of places, but I'll be very specific. One, actually, I'm going to close with an image of Arlington, Virginia. In fact, the Northern Virginia, the area, an area that grew suburbanized very rapidly over the last 30, 40 years, has a number of examples of communities that are now doing what we're talking about here, focusing their growth towards walkable centers and corridors. And Arlington, Virginia is perhaps the best model because, like Richmond Hill is going to be, it is served by a subway, the metro line from downtown DC. In fact, it's probably about the same travel time into the heart of DC, of Washington, DC. And what they did was focus as much growth as possible around the stops, the stations, subway stations, transit stations. And they, as I think certainly the intent is here, very carefully then scaled those down to the neighborhoods nearby and created walkable routes that had retail, places to stop and get coffee or do shopping in the way. As a result, many of the folks who live in the single family neighborhoods who used to depend on their car to drive into Washington, DC or anywhere else they want to go, now walk along these very walkable, inviting streets to Metro and use Metro. I will note that one reason they like doing this is that it costs about twice as much per household to own and operate a car as it does for each car as it does to be able to use transit and walk more. And that is an increasing inducement as people become aware. I'd be glad to throw out some more examples if folks would like, but I would go online and take a look at the communities, Reston, Arlington, Alexandria, that have been going through this kind of transition around Washington, DC. Boston, my own city, is another example of a region where this transition is underway. I hope this answers that question fairly.
Great, thanks, David. We'll keep going. I can see there's a number in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible, but I'm going to ask Vito. You had your hand up. If you want to, if we can unmute Vito, and if you could quickly ask your question, that would be great. Should work now. I'm not hearing Vito. You should be unmuted and able to ask your question, Vito. Okay, I'm going to try, can we try John Lee to unmute? And we'll come back, Vito. And if it doesn't work, if you could put it in the chat, that would be great.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, John. Yes.
Okay, thank you. First, I think thanks David for give good example for a lot, I think, small town or medium town in states. Actually, I researched those cities. I found they are pretty much, I think, a middle density majority. So actually, that's the model we like for Richmond Hill. Actually, but in the past couple years, our plan or proposal for the young corridor is not for those medium density. It's the highest density, I think, can beat downtown Manhattan. So that's not, I think, the style or the work, the quality of life we want. And also, we don't have those infrastructure to beat downtown Toronto or beat downtown Vancouver. That's why I think for our future plan, we should have some, I think, measurable index to drive the plan. Right now, all the description, just concept, just beautiful word. You cannot judge is this right or wrong. For example, should we give a density per hectares, or should we give the percentage of commercial use? Right now, I think the past couple years, just residential. Richmond here already far behind for service, for commercial, for jobs. We need to use some numbers to guide the future development, not just concept, because it can be manipulated, twisted by some, I think, pro-developer counselors. Everybody knows. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Any response for you, Sibel?
Yeah, no, very good comments. And I think what you'll hear is in terms of the process, this is the table setting exercise that we're doing. We're establishing the framework for the update to the official plan. And when we move into the third phase of this process, it's when we actually develop and update new, policies. And it's through that process when we'll start to get into some of those more details in terms of what is the appropriate amount of growth particular parts of the city should be accommodating. But at this juncture, what we're trying to articulate is that not all places are the same, and not all places should be planned in the same way. We want to look at the context of, these different areas within the city, and look at the different expectations for how that particular area should grow and develop. And I think, one of your concerns is, do we have the infrastructure to support that kind of growth? And that's why we're doing this work in tandem with our infrastructure planning work, which includes our transportation master plan, our water and sewer master plan, as well as our parks master plan and recreation master plan, so that we make sure that what we are putting in our official plan is aligned with those other projects, and that we can ensure that development and that infrastructure is provided in lockstep, so that we don't have challenges in the future in terms of accommodating that growth. And along with this, the region is also doing their master plan work. And so everything is actually quite nicely lining up so that we can make sure that the future development happens appropriately. But again, in terms of heights and densities, some of those details, those are in phase 3 of the work that we're doing.
Susan, can I add a quick note here? I've noticed that there are a couple of questions sort of in this general vein. Somebody has just pointed out, if they want to live downtown, they would live downtown. And I want to emphasize, and this gets back to the earlier question about where there are examples of places that have made this sort of transition, that these transitions are most successful when height and density are contained in a fairly tight area around transit. Folks who live within 5 minutes are very likely to take transit. In fact, that's why they move to these areas. They generate relatively little traffic. And boy, do they generate a lot of support for restaurants and cafes and dollars to build parks and other things. But the development really needs to be contained so that people don't worry that it's going to spread and change their neighborhoods. In fact, one of the best tests, I think, of looking at sort of denser centers is to make sure it doesn't change a blade of grass on anybody's front lawn, but instead helps create amenities that folks can walk or bike to use, and enhances the quality of life of their existing neighborhoods. I hope that resonates with some folks.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. And there was a couple in the chat, maybe you want to answer directly just in the chat about how tall buildings were in Arlington, those kinds of things. I'll leave that to you. James, I'm going to ask if there's sort of another common thread. We probably have time for 2 more quick questions before we want to go on to intensification. We will have some time at the end if there's things we don't get covered off. So James?
Yeah, we did address a few of the common threads that have shown up in the chat in the last 2 responses. So someone was wondering on slide 32, it referenced a net benefit to the community, and they were just wondering how that would be measured.
Yeah, this goes again to the idea that, we're not only specifically looking at a particular new development in the building itself, but how that building interacts with the surrounding neighborhood and the area. How does it interact with the public realm that supports it? So when new development comes into play, the surrounding residents and workers, they have, it is a benefit to them as much as it is for the people who are within that building. And it may be through the provision of a courtyard, or the provision of an awning, or new street trees and benches that support that building, new retail and commercial activity at grade, where now you have easier access to the convenience store or the coffee shop or the patisserie, things like that, so that as new development comes in, it enhances your community and just makes it a much more walkable and livable place. And maybe David might have a couple more things to add in that regard.
We're just coming up to our time too,
let's
so
try it.
is that okay, David?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, I just want to try Vito, try you again for your question.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yay.
I had to go to my computer.
Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering on the question of zoning and the consistency with the 2010 official plan. Since you're intensifying along the Yonge Street corridor, is the Yonge Street corridor up to Bloomington going to be affecting the Oak Ridges Moraine and the groundwater system in the Oak Ridges Moraine? And because one of the things that is of concern is things are going through ministerial zoning orders without an environmental assessment, a full environmental assessment. And I'm wondering, is that going to be a precedent, or are we going to have full assessments and full reports and full disclosure of how development is going to come about? Because we've seen, for example, just the latest notice from BAFE increasing its density on townhouses from about 350 to 480 or something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers. And leaving a whole strip of intensification up the high rises, which were suggested at 13 stories, which when the 2010 official plan was approved, it was maximum of 6 or something like that, or 4. Now we're looking at 8 to 14 stories.
Okay, Vito, so the focus maybe on the protection of the Oak Ridges Moraine, and we'll get to some of the intensification pieces, I think, shortly.
Well,
So Sibel, I'll ask you just to respond to that piece, if you would.
Sure. Certainly, there's nothing in our key directions that would suggest that we would be proposing development that would harm the environment. None of the key directions speak to, veering away from the direction that's already provided in the Oak Ridges Conservation Plan. What we were talking about from an urban structure perspective is presently we do have a local center designation up in the Oak Ridges Moraine along Yonge Street, but there may be, as part of our study for that area, an expansion of that local center designation. And that is something, again, that will be worked out through phase 3 in terms of the extent of that and what kind of development would be appropriate for that area, keeping in mind, policy direction that comes from the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan.
well, one of the concerns I have is when I see proposals for a 9-story building on Bayview, right next to a frog crossing that was environmentally sensitive, and without any regard for the sensitive lands in the area, this type of development being proposed and being considered.
Okay, Vito, so I've got the environmental concern down. I'm gonna ask the team to just keep going because there's quite a bit more to cover off, and if there's more for you later, we can circle back. So with that, I know there's some other questions and comments coming in the chat, which is fantastic. We'll be keeping a running tab of those and try to answer as many as possible, but I am going to ask David and Sibel to continue to the next piece. So I think, David, you're up first.
Okay. So one comment that I think is really worth sort of emphasizing here is that built for style, what the style we like will change. Any building built today will probably be, some folks won't like it in 10 years and more folks 20 years later, and maybe other folks will. But what really matters is the experiential quality, basically, that these buildings create along the street. Do they have retail, food, art, culture at the ground floor, things that really interest people, that bring a street to life, that activate the sidewalk? If you can't do that, can you, do they have front doors for individual, think of sort of townhouses that occupy the first 2 floors of an apartment building, so that people see friends and neighbors coming and going? And I think all of this really tells us that I would say, from the most important perspective, that good design really starts with human scale and engaging people and engaging our senses along the streets, along our streets and around our public spaces. Next, please. It's been very interesting. So to watch the impacts of technology, and one of the most obvious lessons has been the impact that digital retail has had on bricks and mortar retail, and particularly on auto-oriented sort of mass market retail. So today, the retail that is growing is largely supported by housing. It's also important to note that in 2019, the last year before the pandemic, roughly half, in fact, probably a little bit more than half of all retail leases in North America were for food or beer, food or alcohol, or cafes, food, coffee, or alcohol, places that people could experience that brought people together. And that one of the things we really want to make sure we do as we intensify is bring our streets to life, create as much housing, kind of critical mass of housing. 1,000 housing units will bring a block of Main Street to life, so that we really can enjoy the dividends of intensification, the sort of enlivening of streets and creating places where we can interact. The other thing that's sort of important to note here is that, ironically, as tech sort of plays a larger and larger role in our economy, it is the personal interactions that tech workers have. They're called sort of creative collisions, the sort of chance meetings that happen because they live, work, play within close proximity to each other in the kinds of centers and corridors that Sibel's been talking about, that really fuel innovation. And one of the big lessons from COVID is that when folks have not been running into each other, innovation productivity has actually dropped off. And therefore, innovation companies, knowledge industries are more interested in having their workers, if possible, inviting their workers to live, work, and play within 5 minutes of each other in their office and their actual office, if they're not going to come into the office every day. Next, please. One thing that has been a fascinating lesson from COVID, and I don't know how many of you have donned 4 jackets to go eat outside last October or November, and maybe this month soon. To me, that is a real demonstration of how much we value community, eating out in public, seeing friends, being seen, being part of our community. And if anything, one of the positive lessons from COVID has been the obvious interest in outdoor dining, in places that bring us together and allow us to share community. And one of the inviting, very positive sort of indications of that is how many cities have made it much easier now to accommodate, to give up a lane of traffic even, or a lane of parking for outdoor dining, because this is, folks are just so interested in ways to come together. In some ways, these urban centers have become our sort of new small towns. Next, please. Sibel.
Okay, great. Thanks again, David. Your comments now lead me to speak about key directions related to the intensification and employment categories. Next slide, please. The intensification category largely focuses on the city centers and corridors and how they interface with surrounding land use. The centers and corridors are where we direct growth and where service, goods, and activities are accessed by the surrounding areas. To ensure that our official plan is providing the guidance we need to achieve our city vision, we are proposing several key directions for how to improve the official plan, as noted on the screen, and I will elaborate on them over the course of the next few slides. But please do note that there are more details provided in our emerging key directions document on our webpage. Next slide, please. Firstly, there's a recommendation that we clarify the purpose and intent of the intensification hierarchy in the official plan. What we mean by the hierarchy is to identify the areas of the city where we propose to direct the majority of new growth. This table provides an overview of elements of the hierarchy and a brief description of each element. It is noteworthy that Richmond Hill Center continues to be at the top of the hierarchy, and as you are aware, the city is working diligently to update and provide more detailed policy direction for the growth and development of this area as a GTA destination. Richmond Hill Center is our first priority for directing growth, given the tremendous amount of transit and related infrastructure investment that has been earmarked for this area. Next in the hierarchy are key development areas and regional corridors. These are largely areas that cater to a regional draw. The KDAs in particular are underutilized lands that have a much greater potential to attract and accommodate population and employment growth. Then we have local centers that also cater to a regional draw, but are also places that have unique characteristics and accordingly may need some more contextually sensitive policy direction. These areas also may have a lot of established development and therefore are not as easily intensified as the preceding levels of the hierarchy. Areas identified as local development areas and local corridors are really intended to serve the local area and are limited in the amount of growth that will accommodate over time. And finally, within the hierarchy, there is also recognition that there are opportunities for neighborhood infill development. These infill areas can be places where we introduce a greater variety of low-rise housing forms that help people to age in place or enter the housing market, and also help the city to achieve a 15-minute community goals, whereby people can access day-to-day goods and services within walking distance from where they live. Next slide, please. I think this was a question in the chat as well. So we want to recognize the differences and similarities between the center designation and the corridor designation. In general, the key direction is that corridors generally play a supporting role to centers, creating transition from one center to the other and to surrounding lands where there are, whether they are neighborhoods, employment, or greenway. While the centers may provide key destinations, we cannot forget that the corridors are often the connection to them and need to be animated and diverse. In both centers and corridors, the public realm plays an important role, as I'd mentioned, when speaking about urban structure and built form. Again, to achieve 15-minute community experiences, we need these areas to provide a mix of uses, be supported by a diverse range of mobility options, and ensure that infrastructure is provided in lockstep with development. These factors will ensure a smooth transition from our current built form to the one we envision for 2041. Next slide, please. A key direction is to designate intensification areas and implement proposed regional major transit station area minimum density targets. As conceptually shown in the urban structure map, we are proposing the designations shown in this table based on the following factors: the hierarchy I just explained, minimum density requirements that will be prescribed by the region, the local context, the 2041 vision, and the consultation we've done to date. Next slide, please. As noted in this key direction, we have not concluded consultation on how we plan for our centers and corridors. Based on our first round of consultation, we are proposing some key directions for centers within the city, and this direction will inform how we plan for associated corridors. The emerging key direction document provides more details, but at a high level, this slide gives you a bit of a sense of key directions for some centers within the city. Starting from the left-hand side of the slide, In terms of Bathurst and Highway 7, we do believe this area would be a local center with a mix of uses. But until we have confirmation from the minister that the lands can be removed from the Parkway Belt West plan, we propose to hold off on planning in earnest for this area. In terms of Yonge and 16th Avenue area, we learned that the planning for this area to date is generally supported and that we should aim to finalize the plan we drafted in 2018 within the broader official plan update context and format. For the village study area, which included lands along Major Mackenzie and Nokirk, we propose identifying 2 centers with their own defining qualities. One for the village, which is a smaller area than what is shown as a downtown local center in the current official plan, and is more specific to the village core area, where we can plan for a more historically sensitive, high-density mixed-use area. And a second center, which essentially promotes the Newkirk local development area to a local center that includes the Richmond Hill GO Station area. For the balance of the study area, we see lands along Yonge Street as being designated regional mixed-use area, and lands along Major Mackenzie continuing to be local corridor. In terms of the city-owned lands at the corner of Yonge and Major Mackenzie, we see this as an important area to catalyze development. And this could be done by creating an important civic outdoor space and also providing an additional civic presence by moving constituent-facing services to this more central location, integrated within a building that offers other uses, which may include office, community, and/or residential uses. Moving to the right-hand side of the slide, we see the need to plan for the Oak Ridges Local Center in recognition of the region's proposed designation of this stretch of Yonge Street as regional corridor, and the function of this area as a supporter of daily activity for neighborhoods surrounding it. In terms of Bayview and Highway 7 and East Beaver Creek and Highway 7, elevating these areas to mixed use from the current neighborhood and employment designations, respectively, means that we have more work to do when planning for this area. While we may have some ideas of how they could be built out, we need to undertake more consultation and analysis. There's more information about these study areas in the Emerging Key Directions document. One thing to note is that we are testing a maximum density for each to determine what impact permitting this level of growth would have on current and planned infrastructure. This modeling exercise may indicate that we need to reconsider what are appropriate maximum densities for these and surrounding areas. Next slide, please. So as mentioned when we initiated the official plan update, economic development and provision of jobs for residents of Richmond Hill is a key objective of this official plan update. Based on the analysis we've done to date, we have identified key directions for intensification areas as well as employment areas. We will need to continue to work with the business and development industry to determine necessary policy changes to support and foster economic growth. What we know at this point is that our policies need to be more flexible to minimize barriers for existing and new businesses to respond to changes in technology, as well as other market, employee, and client demands. And Susan, that brings me to the next poll.
Great, thanks. Thank you both once again. So we'll start the same way. We'll start with a poll and then open it up. There's some questions and comments that have been coming in the chat, which is really great. And I love how people are building on each other's ideas. So this one, again, same question, to what extent do you agree with the key direction? Okay, it looks like the responses are slowing down. Yep. Okay, I think we've got most of them in. So again, hopefully you can see the results on the screen. We have 16% strongly agree, 36 on agree, 16 disagree, 6 strongly disagree, and then 26 again unsure. So again, for those who are unsure, if there's things you need clarified, just feel free to put them in the chat. You can chat to the panelists as well as chat to everyone. So we give you that option if you'd like. And we'll do the same thing. We'll open it up for some questions. James, maybe I'll start. You've been tracking the ones in the chat, and then we'll go to a couple on the phone.
Sure. So there were a few along the same lines. So I'll ask a couple, but they're quite similar. So one person was wondering what mechanisms are available to encourage developers to consider alternative mixed-use built forms. And someone followed up with what role do developers and commercial leasing companies play to ensure more inviting street level retail?
Yep. Great questions. Actually, maybe I'll first let David give us some suggestions, and I can add more to it.
Okay, I'm going to go to the second question more probably than the first. Frankly, developers have an incentive to activate their ground floors. I'm sorry, that's somebody didn't want to see, that's jargon, and someone said, please don't use jargon. To put uses that people really enjoy, that invite them into their buildings, because those same uses, a great place to get coffee or grab a beer, a brewery is a place that people also want to live near, so they pay more rent upstairs. It's easier to attract employers and jobs to buildings like that. So there is a natural incentive that is built in. Clearly, without trying to position Sibel or Patrick or the rest of my good colleagues here, the city can also require active, think retail, food, even arts and culture spaces along streets where it really matters. I noticed someone earlier pointed out that there are businesses that move into first floors and cover their windows with paper or in other ways do not activate the street. Well, that's something that you can address through zoning and through encouraging uses that really do activate the street. Not everywhere, not every street can be walkable, but along those streets that really matter, where you really do want people walking, you do want to sort of encourage community life. Let me pause there. Sibel, what did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that we're, along with doing this official plan update, we're also doing an investment attraction strategy. So we're through the official plan work and that we're trying to engage with businesses to really understand what are the ingredients necessary to help them to invest and to locate in Richmond Hill, and to work with developers to take on properties that are available along our centers and corridors in a mixed use environment. So we know that sometimes it's been challenging to get new businesses into those buildings, but at the same time, as you have more and more people living and working in the area, then it becomes more and more attractive for new businesses to locate in those buildings. So as we further intensify, it'll become easier to bring in those type of uses. And I think one of the directions from an employment perspective is that flexibility, right? Like, let's create spaces that can adapt to different uses over time, so that you may have a nail salon one day, and then a few years later, a different business can occupy that space, and there's economies of scale that happen, right? As you have more businesses coming, more want to come, and you can certainly see that in older downtowns where the streets are end to end, having a mix of uses.
Okay, great. Thank you both. I think we'll go to Brian. If we can have Brian unmute and ask your question, Brian. I'm just going to remind folks, if you can keep them short, that's great. And then we can get through more of them. Oh, did we lose you? Okay, Brian's hand went down, but I know you've been putting some things in the chat. Oh, there you are again. Okay, want to try again?
There, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
There we go. I guess I hit unsure on the key directions for urban design because of this question about how benefit to the community is gauged. Like somebody wants to put a 30-story building on a lot, and they say, oh, well, we'll put a bench out front, we'll put an awning, and there's your community benefit. That to me is not net public benefit. You've brought all these people and you've created shadows and traffic and whatnot. These are all downsides of this development. How do we gauge that there's going to be a net benefit? There's going to be more benefit than there is drawback to putting that building there. How is that going to be gauged, and is that going to be part of the official plan? Or is that something that's just decided on a per application basis?
Okay, that's great, Brian. Thank you. Sibel, did you want to start, or David? Sibel's unmuting, I see.
I'll let David go first.
Okay, so one thing David want to say is that a well-planned community and one that it manages growth grows greener as it grows denser. One of the wonderful things about this process is that Richmond Hill is taking responsibility for saying what are the community benefits that it wants from development. Development for its own sake is not necessarily of any value. It's what development can achieve for the community. Obviously, fiscal benefits are a very important part of that. But to make clear what kinds of public spaces you need, what kinds of activities you'd like lining buildings, what kinds of public facilities, community facilities you need that become part of, how should I say it, the gateway requirements for achieving greater density and things like that, is a really important part of this plan and something you all have a voice in articulating. Affordable housing is yet another benefit that's a very important one to consider, particularly given the dramatic difference between the change in incomes and change in housing prices in Richmond Hill. I could go on, but Sibel, I suspect it's time to hand it over.
I would just want to add one thing is, you may recall in the beginning, I talked about the context changing from what the 2010 OP. And one example of that is changes to the Planning Act. So the Planning Act had provisions in it where a city could negotiate with a land developer to allow for greater higher density. And by doing so, a community benefit was provided, and these were done on a one-off basis. Planning Act's change, that ability has been removed, and instead the expectation is that all development provides a community benefit. And how we establish those community benefits is through a broader strategy that the city is working on, and through our official plan. So like David mentioned, and through our master planning as well, if we're planning for the city and we're planning for how we want the city to grow and develop, and we articulate that in the plan, then as development comes, the expectation is that the benefits will also come into play, whether it's on-site or off-site, or it's just the fact that development is there is the benefit. You know what I mean? So through our continued consultation in phase 3, we will work with the community to identify what it is when we say we want a net benefit. Every new building is going to be an improvement to our city in terms of what it has to offer. So it is something we want to do in consultation with you.
Great, thank you both. James, we'll do another one from the chat.
Yeah, there's a few questions just looking for clarity on terms, so I may ask them all together. Someone was wondering if the difference between a local corridor and a regional corridor could be explained. Someone was wondering what an RMUC is, and someone was hoping for a definition on constituent-facing service. So just a few terms to clarify, please.
Okay, I'll try to remember the three that you asked. So in terms of constituent-facing services, right now, we have a counter service that we provide at East Beaver Creek where people come in and they can ask questions about planning. They can make applications for building permits. They can pay their bills. There's a number of services that are offered at the ground floor of East Beaver Creek. So one consideration is perhaps we can move those services to Major Mackenzie and Yonge Street, which is much more centrally located within Richmond Hill. And that would be a bit of a catalyst because you would have this constituent-facing services happening in the center of the city. And that might also allow for other office development to be interested in locating in that area as well. So that's what we meant by that. The RMUC acronym is Regional Mixed Use Corridor. And I think the third one was the difference between a local corridor and a regional corridor. So the regional corridors are identified by the region in their official plan. And so those are along Yonge Street and Highway 7. A local corridor is identified at the local level, and we have one along Major Mackenzie as a local corridor serving more of the local neighborhood around it. So hopefully those answer your questions.
James, can I jump in with one answer? Alex Wong has noted that the pandemic has taught us that packing people close to one another is risky. Why are we advocating that? And I think it's important to note that actually COVID has not correlated with density. It is correlated with poverty. And that walkable neighborhoods, places where people do not use their car much, but walk, have much lower incidences of diabetes and a whole series of illnesses. And in fact, the healthiest environments in North America are urban cores where people walk. They report the best public health data. And one of the things that we haven't talked about are in fact the public health implications of the way that Sibel is talking about focusing growth. Sorry for jumping in, but I thought that was useful.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, David. I'm going to go to Donna Smith. So if we can let Donna unmute, we just have a couple more minutes on this one. We'll get the information out on the next piece and hopefully get to some more questions there. So Donna, if you can unmute, that would be great. Okay, it seems like Donna's not able to unmute. Donna, if you want to put a question in the chat, that would be great, and we'll try to get to it as we keep going forward. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. I know there's some other ones in the chat, and we'll try to get to some of those as we go forward. Part of the next piece is climate change implementation and the technical side, which may answer some of those implementation questions. So Sibel.
Thanks, Susan. So this does bring us to the final three key direction categories, and that means our presentation's nearly done. So we can go to the next slide, please. The climate change key directions are largely dictated by the city's approved Community Energy and Emissions Plan, which we call Richmond Hill's Path to a Low Carbon Future. As noted on the slide, this council-approved plan has set a target of net zero by 2050, meaning by 2050, Richmond Hill will have reduced its greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible and will not be emitting more than it is offsetting. From an official plan perspective, we realize that climate change mitigation and adaptation transcends the policies of the official plan and all land use designations, and some of the key directions already mentioned or soon to be mentioned equally respond to climate change mitigation and adaptation. Nonetheless, we want to emphasize the importance of bolstering official plan policies related to matters such as built form, natural heritage, renewable energy, and transportation, to name a few, in order to ensure new development and public works are prepared to do their part in achieving this ambitious target. Next slide, please. To have a better appreciation of what the Community Energy and Emissions Plan is trying to achieve, here is a graph that charts our path to net zero and how we aim to reduce our carbon emissions over the next 30 years. It is important to note that many of the actions outlined in the SEEP are land use planning related. In fact, in order to reduce 82% of our business as usual GHG emissions, we need to make land use planning related changes to the way we protect our natural heritage, to the design of our communities, to the way we build and renovate buildings in our communities, and to the way we move ourselves and goods within our communities. Accordingly, we need to make sure that our official plan policies enable and direct for those changes. David, I believe you two wanted to make a few comments about this climate change key direction and our implementation key directions.
I did, and if we go to the next slide, please. I'll make this quickly. I think the major point here, this is actually that map that goes from red to green is actually the GTA. And the greener it gets, the lower the per capita carbon footprint of folks who live in those places are. And what you will note, in fact, you can probably figure it out, is the denser, the more walkable, the more transit served, the lower the carbon, in fact, all emissions footprint per capita. And in fact, the single most effective thing a community can do to reduce its carbon footprint is to focus its growth into walkable areas that are transit served, where people do not have to depend on a car. And I will add, gratuitously, it is also the healthiest, the best way to enhance public health. There are lots of other advantages in terms of sharing, creating eco districts that share energy and the ability to handle waste, et cetera. But it is really the lower carbon and emissions footprints that I think are the message.
I think there's one more slide.
Yes, so a number of you have pointed out, I think very rightly, that a plan is, this is my framing, not necessarily yours, is only as good as its implementation. And I could not agree more strongly. I think one of the really great things about the fact there are so many of you on this call, in this meeting, participating in this process, is you are bringing your diverse values and goals and aspirations to shaping the goals that will guide your community's growth. And this process has taken lots of time, your planning staff's time, your counselor's time, et cetera. It's worth really respecting the outcome. Now, circumstances will change, but the goals probably should endure. And I think certainly until you go through another process like this to set new goals. So some folks have said, well, how do we encourage? How do we really implement this plan in such a way that when people come in with new ideas, we didn't anticipate that the result is a net benefit to get is community benefit, which I think Sibel has explained. And one way to do that is to look at council's criteria, which are terrific. Look at the 4 pillars that translate those criteria into planning guidance, and develop criteria for what constitutes net benefits to Richmond Hill. Does the development take advantage maybe of greater density to be more inclusive, to create a more inclusive and inviting public realm, a place that people can bike to and walk to and enjoy, that enhances our quality of life? Does it create jobs that otherwise might not be in Richmond Hill, or spin off other economic benefits? Does it provide greater or deeper, meaning for folks with lower income, affordability that this community very much needs? Enhanced environmental benefit. You can read the list. But the point is, this is not necessarily the list, but really understanding what criteria should guide interpretation of this plan is very helpful. And you know what? A lot of public interest going forward in how the plan's being implemented is just as helpful. So thanks for all those points in the in the chat.
Thank you, David. So in terms of implementation tools, we heard from you the importance of providing an evaluation framework for reviewing applications to amend the official plan. And this is something we'll want to consider and consult on during phase 3 of the official plan update. In addition to that, we also see recommendations coming from the affordable housing strategy, the community energy and emissions plan, as well as studies that are underway for the comprehensive zoning bylaw that indicate that the official plan ought to be updated to enable the use of planning tools such as inclusionary zoning, community planning permits, and community improvement plans. As such, a key direction here is to continue to consult on what policy changes should be considered to enable the use of these tools. Next slide, please. Finally, in terms of technical change, as you will see here, we have highlighted a number of technical changes we will need to consider when updating the official plan. Some of these are mandatory when it comes to conformity with the regional official plan and provincial plans and policies, whereas others are optional but highly recommended to assist with implementation of the plan. And these relate to things like clarification of policies. One thing we will want to make sure we do through ongoing consultation with Indigenous communities is to make sure the official plan is clear on when and how future consultation with these communities is required to ensure that we are all making the best use of our limited resources and protecting our respective interests. And that, Susan, is the end of our presentation, and we can go to the final poll.
Okay, great. So same setup as before, quick poll, climate change, implementation, technical directions. Get a little bit of feedback on those from you would be great. Okay, I think most have answered. And you should be able to see the results again on the screen. So we have 15% on agreeing, or sorry, strongly agreeing, 31 on agree, 8 disagree, 2 strongly disagree, and 44 who are unsure. So that's a higher number on this one. It would be great to get some feedback if there's specific parts of that you're not sure about. That would be very helpful, I think, to the team, which you can either do sort of through the chat here, or if you do participate in the survey, there's a spot there to really help as well. Again, as Sibel mentioned, the team will be kind of taking feedback from tonight in that survey and looking at all of that together. Before we open up to questions, though, I think, David, I think you have one more slide before we open up our questions.
Okay, and this is a slide that comes back to what a couple of folks have asked. Where has this model been applied? And I'd say in increasingly around major metropolitan areas across North America. It's we have to remember that it's not just going forward. Probably the last 5 or 6 years, the large majority of net new households have been singles and couples who are much more interested in moving to places that are highly amenitized, walkable, mixed use, and that has provided a strong development incentive to accelerate this process. So, the example here is, I mentioned this earlier, is Arlington, Virginia. And what I find fascinating about Arlington, because I followed this story for quite some time, if you see the small photo, it's got a white border sort of on the upper left of the larger photo, it is a typical Arlington neighborhood. If you look in the background, you see a lot of tall buildings. Those tall buildings provide the kind of environment you see in the larger photograph. They provide lots of amenity. As Arlington has grown denser, it has grown greener. They provide parks and public spaces. But what they really provide is added amenity, enhanced quality of life for those single family neighborhoods. And again, while originally this was planned as a transit corridor and then became a higher density mixed use corridor, it is probably considered by most of the folks who live in Arlington, many of whom have lived there for decades, many decades, it's an aging community, as an amenity corridor. It is a place folks can walk to. You can go back to your wonderful single family home that you love after work and then take a walk to a restaurant for dinner and meet friends. And that's the kind of combination of preserved neighborhoods and enhanced corridors that people in the DC metro area have increasingly adopted as a path forward. And I mentioned to Sibel and to Patrick earlier, if somehow Richmond Hill could find some buses and put lots of folks on buses, it would be great to take a trip down and talk to folks about their reactions and how they were involved. And actually, one thing that's very similar between Arlington and Richmond Hill is a very strong tradition of planning. In Arlington, they call it the Arlington Way. And this tradition has partly developed around the need to make sure that Arlington takes advantage of this transit corridor, achieves the kind of density, economic benefits, brings jobs to the community, provides housing options for an increasingly diverse population in ways that step down to and provide benefit for those neighborhoods, because that happens much more naturally when folks are involved in the planning to create it. So on that note, thank you for your interest and look forward to more questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Brian, I'm going to try Donna again. So Donna, if you want to try to unmute one more time, see if we can get your question answered. Okay, it looks like we're not having success to get Donna's ability to unmute. So James, in the meantime, we'll go to you.
Sure, thank you. So we had a question from before that I wasn't able to get to, so I'll take the opportunity to get to it now. Someone asks, to what extent does architectural excellence in design, aesthetic quality, and quality building materials fit into design excellence?
Sibel?
Well, I think all of those things are part of what we would qualify as design excellence. But beyond that, beyond the sort of that visual, it's the interaction of built form with public spaces and the quality of life that comes with new development. So something, it's just beyond the visual. It's about the experiences that you can have with development and the development in combination with other development in the area. So it's certainly an element, and it's something that I suspect as we develop new policies, we'll be looking more at a criteria-based system as opposed to a prescriptive system, because what we don't want to do is kill innovation, right? So if new architects come with great ideas, we want to make sure that we can support that using criteria rather than relying on a cookie cutter approach or very prescriptive policies.
Okay, thanks, Sibel. I'm going to try if we could unmute Wei. So Brian, it looks like it's still muted. I don't know if you can help Wei unmute. Okay, no luck there either. I'm not sure why we can't get them unmuted, but we'll keep going. James, others, there were, I think, some others earlier, maybe we want to circle back to.
I have some ones regarding implementation too. So someone notes David's examples do not show diverse centers of Richmond Hill or York Region. So how can the OP be made stronger in order to have more of these great ideas come to fruition?
So, sorry, how can we make the OP stronger?
I think they want to know like how to bring some of David's ideas that he shared tonight to fruit. How do we make those a reality?
Because we're supposed to build aspiration, not yield frustration.
Yeah, so I guess when developing these emerging key directions, we're doing our best to kind of incorporate the recommendations and the suggestions from David. This conversation we're having with the public right now and the kind of responses we're getting in the chat is really helpful to help to strengthen that framework. And then, of course, we still have phase 3, which is the policy development phase, where we'll want to make sure that we pull forward these good ideas and formulate them in a way that we can execute. And I think that's, the main question is, execution and implementation. And so what we want to make sure is we're developing policies that are implementable and that we can achieve the goals that we're identifying through this process. And again, not to belabor it, but we are working with related plans simultaneously. And that alignment really does help to ensure that we achieve that common vision, with all of the work that the city is doing.
Okay, thanks. James, are there others?
Yes, I have a couple more. So someone was wondering if there are any new KDAs that are being considered. So Isabel, if you could please revisit that.
Yeah, actually, we have not identified any new KDAs. We have identified what we think are what we propose as local centers. So we have the Yonge and 16th area, which is a key development area, and the Yonge and Bernard area, which is a key development area. And those are, large areas with lots of potential for intensification and redevelopment, given the way they are currently being used. And I think with respect to other centers, we are thinking of them as local centers, given their unique characteristics.
Okay, great. James?
Yeah, I have another question from earlier. So someone was thinking about the concept of corridor intensification and how those corridors become more walkable and livable. From their perspective, they didn't think that that was possible, the two concepts.
Well, as I mentioned before, the corridors are sort of connect these centers together. And in order for the area overall to be walkable, you want to amenitize your corridors just as much as you do within your centers. The corridors generally are narrower in terms of lot depth, so they can be a little bit more difficult to have them developed in the same manner that we would see in a center. But there is opportunity, and we've certainly seen it. Like we have a lot of Yonge Street stretch where we have newer development that has non-residential uses at grade, or they are proposing or have office space and commercial uses. So we see like it's happening, and we want to perpetuate that and continue that along our corridors.
Okay, great. James, it looks like you've gone through many of them. And I'm just conscious of our time. So I think with that, and I see some good comments coming through the chat, which is great. I'm sorry we couldn't get the unmuting for some folks to work. But hopefully you're still able to provide your thoughts in the chat or through the other avenues. I just want to share with folks what other ways they can stay involved in the process. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be great, and what the next steps are. So in terms of next steps, the key directions report will be released in November. Following, there's the York Region draft official plan release and consultation. Our team will also be putting together what we heard report out of this session before that. The December 8th will be the council endorsement of key directions, and then the 2022 to 2023, or phase 3 consultation and adoption of the official plan amendments. So those are sort of the city timelines. In terms of ways to stay engaged and informed, if we can go to the next slide, we have similar for many of you who were part of the earlier process. There is that online survey. You can read the key directions, emerging key directions report online. It's available there. The survey is open until October 21st. Make sure you're registered for updates. You can attend future meetings, and you can connect through that richmondhill.ca OPU or OP update link that's there. And yeah, James has included that in the chat as well for folks. You're always welcome to discuss issues and concerns with staff or your regional and local representatives as well. We also had noted that the city will be continuing to collaborate and be engaged with a number of other groups and interested parties as this process goes forward. So there's a lot of consultation that will continue with York Region and the province and the federal government, as well as local organizations, special interest groups. So these folks are all part of the process of developing what the official plan update will be, looking at its implementation, and then of course continuing to engage with the community like yourselves to seek your input. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you for spending time with us this evening. We really appreciate your participation. There is, as I said, a survey that you can complete in terms of feedback for the emerging key directions, but also once this meeting ends, there'll be an opportunity for you to provide some feedback from the event tonight. Sibel, did you want to say anything final to wrap it up?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Thanks, David. And thank you to the whole team for supporting us as we go through this presentation. I accidentally got kicked out for a second, so I just wanted to make sure people were aware. The full suite of emerging key directions, again, they are available on our website. And I'm sure Susan mentioned this, but in November, we'll have a more robust document that will reflect what we hear through this process with kind of what we would propose as final key directions for council endorsement. And there'll be more details in there in terms of the rationale behind the key directions. So hopefully people will take some time to take a look at that document before we bring it to council in December for their endorsement. And thank you again for joining us tonight. I do appreciate your input.
Great, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.